Commander Lee Hanna stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive towers of crystal that reached into the sky. The Galactic Defense Council headquarters on Nexus Prime was bigger than any city she had ever seen. Each tower was made of some kind of blue crystal that caught the light from 3 different suns. The towers were so tall that their tops disappeared into the clouds. She had been to many worlds during her 15 years of military service, but nothing quite like this. Alien ships of every shape and size filled the sky around the towers. Some looked like metal fish swimming through the air. Others were perfect spheres that glowed with their own light. A few were so strange that she could not even guess what they were supposed to be. The summons had arrived 3 days ago while she was on shore leave back on Earth. She had been sitting in a small cafe in Seoul, enjoying real coffee and watching people walk by on the street. The message was short and cold. It said she was required to appear before the full council for a strategic consultation about recent attacks by the Dominion. But Hanna knew better than to believe that was all there was to it. She had been fighting the Morgathi Dominion for 8 years. She knew their ships, their weapons, and their tactics better than almost anyone in the human fleet. If the council really wanted strategic advice, they would have asked for reports or held a video conference. They would not have demanded that she travel halfway across the galaxy to appear in person. No, this was about something else entirely. This was about doubt. The reports of her victories had spread throughout the Alliance. The impossible rescue at Kepler 442, where she had saved 12,000 civilians with only 2 ships. The defense of New Sol, where she had held off an entire Dominion fleet with nothing but fighters and orbital platforms. The extraction from the Void Nebula, where she had somehow gotten an entire battle group out of what should have been certain death. The other species in the Alliance had trouble believing these stories. They followed rules when they fought wars. They calculated odds and made careful plans. They built bigger ships and stronger weapons and hoped that would be enough. The idea that one human could change the outcome of impossible battles just by thinking differently was hard for them to accept. Hanna walked through the main entrance of the council building. The hallway was enormous. The ceiling was at least 50 meters high and covered with moving pictures that showed the history of the Alliance. She saw the first meeting between humans and the Veltar people. She saw the signing of the Defense Treaty that created the Council. She saw battles against pirates and raiders and other threats, but mostly she saw doubt in the eyes of the aliens who passed her in the hallway. They looked at her uniform with its collection of medals and ribbons. They saw her rank insignia that marked her as one of the youngest fleet commanders in human history. And then they looked at her face and saw someone who appeared far too young and small to have accomplished the things in her file. A tall, blue creature with 4 arms approached her. Its skin looked like it was made of liquid metal that constantly shifted and flowed. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music played through water. Commander Lee Hanna of the Terran Defense Force, I am Guide Nalseth. The Council is ready for you. She followed the guide through corridors that seemed to go on forever. They passed rooms where beings from dozens of different worlds worked together on problems she could not even imagine. In one room, creatures that looked like living trees were examining holographic star charts. In another, beings made of pure energy were having what appeared to be a heated argument with robots. Finally, they reached a pair of doors that were 30 meters tall and covered with symbols from every member species of the Alliance. The doors opened with a sound like distant thunder. The council chamber was the largest room Hanna had ever seen. It was shaped like a bowl with seats rising up in circles around a central platform. Every seat was occupied by a different type of being. She saw creatures with scales, creatures with fur, creatures that seemed to be made of living rock. There were beings that floated in the air inside bubbles of water. There were others that looked like they were made of pure light. At the highest point of the chamber sat High Arbiter Veltar. His people were among the first that humans had met when they joined the Alliance. He was 3 meters tall and covered in gray skin that looked like armor. His face had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows. His species had evolved from predators on a world where only the strongest survived. But they had learned that sometimes strength meant knowing when not to fight. Veltar's voice was deep and carried easily through the vast chamber. Commander Lee Hanna of the Terran Defense Force, you stand before the representatives of 47 worlds united in common defense against those who would destroy what we have built together. Hana walked to the center platform. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every move. Some were curious, some were skeptical, a few seemed almost hostile. Your reputation has spread far beyond the borders of human space, Veltar continued. Stories of impossible victories. Tales of a single ship turning the tide of battle against overwhelming odds. Accounts of strategies that defy all conventional military wisdom. He paused and let his 6 eyes focus on her. The Council finds itself curious about these stories. Some among us wonder if perhaps they have grown in the telling. Others question whether the reports accurately reflect what actually happened in these battles. From her left came a clicking sound. She turned to see Counselor Thren, whose people looked like giant insects with shiny black shells and too many arms. His species communicated partly through sound and partly through the movement of their limbs. We have reviewed the official reports from all your major engagements, Thren said. His voice came through a translation device that made it sound mechanical and cold. The numbers are difficult to believe. At Kepler 442 you were outnumbered, 20-1. At New Sol your force was less than half the size of the attacking fleet. In the Void Nebula, military experts from 3 different species declared the situation hopeless before you even arrived. Another voice spoke from the right side of the chamber. This one belonged to Counselor Zara-An, whose crystalline body caught and reflected the light in beautiful patterns. These victories would be remarkable for any commander. For a human, barely 30 years old and commanding for less than a decade, they seem almost impossible. The chamber fell silent. Hana could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on her like a physical thing. These beings had seen thousands of years of warfare between their species. They had fought pirates and invaders and rebels. They knew how battles were supposed to work. They understood odds and tactics and the careful balance of ships and weapons and technology. What they did not understand was how one human could make all of that irrelevant. Hana looked around the chamber slowly. She saw doubt in alien faces that she had learned to read during years of diplomatic meetings and joint operations. She saw skepticism in the way some delegates sat back in their seats. She saw the careful neutrality of those who wanted to believe, but could not quite convince themselves. And she saw opportunity. Counselors, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the vast space without any amplification. I understand your skepticism. You have built this alliance on logic and careful planning. You make decisions based on facts and proven strategies. You calculate the odds before you act. She took a step forward. You want to know if I have really accomplished the things described in these reports. You want to know if one human can really make the difference between victory and defeat when the odds seem impossible. Another step forward. Her hands were clasped behind her back in perfect military posture. Her voice was calm and steady. I can talk about tactics and strategy. I can explain my decisions and walk you through every detail of every battle. I can show you charts and graphs and computer models that prove my methods work. She paused and let her dark eyes sweep across the assembled representatives of 47 worlds. Or I can prove it to you directly, here and now, in a way that will leave no room for doubt. The silence that followed her words was complete. Not a single being in the vast chamber made a sound. I can talk, or I can prove it, Hana said quietly. Choose one. The silence in the council chamber stretched on like the space between stars. Commander Lee Hana stood perfectly still in the center of the platform, waiting. Around her, hundreds of alien beings sat frozen in their seats, trying to process what she had just said. High Arbiter Veltar was the first to move. His 6 eyes blinked one after another, which Hana knew meant he was thinking very hard about something important. His gray armored skin seemed to shift color slightly, becoming darker. From the insect-like Counselor Thren came a rapid clicking sound. His translation device made his mechanical voice sound even more uncertain than usual. Commander, surely, you cannot be serious about this proposal. I am completely serious, Hana replied without moving from her position. You have questions about my combat record. That is reasonable and fair. But you should understand something about me, Counselor Thren. I did not survive 8 years of fighting the Morgathi Dominion by making speeches in committee rooms. A new sound filled the chamber. It was a low rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Hana recognized it as the sound the Keth delegation made when they were interested in something. The Keth were warriors by nature, and they respected strength more than words. Admiral Kim Daeho watched from the human section of the chamber. He had served with Hana during the early days of the war against the Dominion. He knew exactly what the council was about to witness if they made the wrong choice. His weathered face showed a mixture of pride and concern. Veltar raised one of his forearms to quiet the chamber. The rumbling died away, but the tension remained thick in the air like smoke from a fire. "Commander Lee," Veltar said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing to prove your claims?" Hana allowed herself a small smile. It was not a friendly expression. "The Council maintains military training facilities here on Nexus Prime, does it not? Full-scale battle simulation systems with holographic environments and artificial intelligence opponents programmed with real enemy tactics?" "We do," Veltar confirmed. "But those systems are for training purposes, for preparing our forces for actual combat situations." "Perfect. Then you can create a scenario for me. Any scenario you choose. Make it as difficult as you want. Give me impossible odds and limited resources. Program the computer opponents with Morgathi tactical doctrine and let them adapt to my strategies in real time." The chamber erupted in noise. Dozens of species began talking at once in languages that ranged from musical tones to grinding mechanical sounds. Some delegates leaned back in their seats as if trying to get away from what they saw as dangerous human aggression. Others moved forward with obvious interest. Counselor Zara'an, whose crystalline body caught the light from the chamber's ceiling, spoke with a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "This is highly unusual, Commander. The simulation complex is a serious military facility. It is not intended for demonstrations or theatrical displays." "Theatrical?" There was something sharp and dangerous in Hana's voice now. "Counselor, with great respect, there is nothing theatrical about what I do in combat. War is not a performance. It is not entertainment. It is life and death decided by split-second choices and the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect the people counting on you." She turned to address the entire chamber. "But if you prefer, we can sit here while I give you detailed reports about every battle I have ever fought. I can draw diagrams and show you computer models and explain my tactical decisions step by step. And when I am finished, you will leave this chamber with exactly the same doubts you came in with." The chamber fell quiet again. Hana could see the council members looking at each other, having silent conversations through gestures and expressions that their various species used for private communication. High Arbiter Veltar stood up from his seat. At full height, he was an impressive and intimidating figure. His species had evolved from apex predators, and even after thousands of years of civilization, they still carried that dangerous presence. "Commander Lee Hana of the Terran Defense Force," he said formally. "The Council will consider your proposal. However, you must understand the implications of what you are suggesting. Should we accept your challenge and you fail to prove your claims, it would not only damage your personal reputation, it could affect how this alliance views humanity's contributions to our common defense." Hana nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I understand completely, High Arbiter. I would not have made this offer if I was not prepared to accept the consequences of failure. And if we choose instead to hear your verbal report, then you will receive a very thorough briefing. I will provide detailed tactical analyses, casualty reports, and strategic assessments of every major engagement I have commanded. You will have access to complete records, witness statements, and computer reconstructions of each battle." Hana paused and let her eyes sweep across the assembled delegates. "But when it is over, you will still be wondering if the reports are accurate. You will still be questioning whether one human can really accomplish the impossible when everything says it cannot be done." She straightened her shoulders and clasped her hands behind her back again. "The choice before you is simple, counselors. You can have comfortable uncertainty, or you can have uncomfortable proof. You can continue to wonder, or you can know for certain." From the back of the chamber came a new voice. It belonged to Counselor Rethan, whose people were known for their careful and methodical approach to every problem. They never made quick decisions about anything important. Commander, assuming we were to accept your proposal, what assurance do we have that the simulation would provide a fair test of your abilities? How do we know you have not studied our training systems and learned how to defeat them through technical knowledge rather than tactical skill? Hana's smile returned, and this time there was something almost predatory about it. Counselor Rethon, I invite you and your colleagues to design the scenario yourselves. Choose the parameters, set the difficulty level, select the enemy forces and their capabilities. I will enter that simulation knowing nothing about what I will face except that you have specifically designed it to be as challenging as possible. She took a step forward. Make it impossible, counselors. Give me odds that no reasonable commander would ever accept. Put me in a situation where conventional military wisdom says there is no chance of success, and then watch what happens when someone who does not follow conventional military wisdom takes command. The chamber was silent again, but this silence was different. It was not the quiet of shock or confusion. It was the silence of a group making a decision that would change everything that came after. High Arbiter Veltar looked around at his fellow council members. He saw nods from some, thoughtful expressions from others, and obvious skepticism from a few. But he also saw something else. He saw curiosity. And in a chamber full of beings from 47 different worlds, curiosity was a powerful force. The council will vote, he announced. All in favor of accepting Commander Lee's challenge? The votes came in slowly at first, then more quickly as delegates made their choices. When the counting was finished, the result was clear. Commander Lee Hana, Veltar said formally, the Galactic Defense Council accepts your challenge. We will design a combat scenario specifically for this test. You will have one opportunity to prove your claims under conditions of our choosing. Hana bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. Thank you, High Arbiter. When do we begin? Immediately. The simulation complex will be prepared within the hour. As the council members began filing out of the chamber to observe the test, Hana remained on the central platform. Admiral Kim approached from the human section, his expression worried. Hana, you know what you are risking here. If this goes badly, it won't go badly, Admiral. She turned to face him, and he saw complete confidence in her dark eyes. Do you know what scenario they are going to choose? Kim had been listening to the conversations between council members as they left the chamber. From what I overheard, they are planning to recreate something very similar to the Kepler 442 situation. Impossible odds, civilian evacuation under fire, limited resources against overwhelming enemy forces. Hana's smile was sharp and knowing. They want to test whether I can really do the impossible things they have read about in my reports. And, can you? She looked toward the chamber doors where the council members had disappeared to prepare for what would soon become the most watched military simulation in Alliance history. Admiral, they are about to find out exactly what humans do when everyone else says something cannot be done. The simulation preparation chamber was smaller than Commander Hana had expected, but it was filled with technology that made her head spin. Holographic displays showed dozens of different weapons and equipment options. Control panels covered every wall, their alien symbols glowing in colors that human eyes could barely see. The air hummed with power from machines she could not identify. Through the thick windows that separated the prep chamber from the observation gallery, she could see the delegates from 47 different worlds taking their seats. It looked like the strangest audience in the history of the galaxy. Floating jellyfish-like creatures hovered next to beings made of living crystal. Giant insect people sat beside humanoids covered in scales. Some delegates required special atmospheric suits to breathe. Others existed as pure energy contained in glowing fields. The sight would have been funny under different circumstances, but Hana knew that what happened in the next hour would determine not just her own career, but possibly how the entire galaxy viewed humanity's place in the Alliance. Admiral Kim entered the preparation chamber, his weathered face showing the worry he was trying to hide. He carried a data pad with information about the scenario the council had chosen. Hana, I have the mission parameters, he said quietly. You need to see this before you go in. She took the datapad and read the scenario details. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she took in the numbers. Evacuation of 15,000 civilians from New Busan colony while defending against a full Morgothi assault fleet. Available resources include 1 heavy cruiser, 2 frigates, and 12 fighters. Enemy force consists of 12 capital ships, 40 escort vessels, and unlimited ground troops. Kim nodded grimly. They have basically recreated the Kepler 442 situation but made it worse. 3-to-1 odds in space plus enemy ground forces already on the planet, and they have programmed the artificial intelligence with advanced Morgothi learning protocols so it will adapt to your tactics in real time. Hana handed the datapad back to him and began checking her equipment one more time. Her pulse rifle felt familiar and reassuring in her hands, even though she knew it would be replaced by virtual equivalents once the simulation began. She tested her tactical display, verified her communication systems, and made sure her armor was properly sealed. The Council thinks they are being clever, Kim observed. They have created a scenario that matches exactly the kind of impossible situation they claim to doubt you could handle. They want to see if I can really do what the reports say I did. Hana finished her equipment check and moved toward the PO simulation chamber entrance. This time, they get to watch every second of it happen. As she approached the chamber door, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see High Arbiter Veltar approaching, his massive form filling the narrow corridor. Despite his intimidating appearance, his posture showed respect rather than hostility. "High Arbiter," Hana said with a slight nod. "Commander Lee, I wanted to speak with you privately before you begin this test." His 6 eyes focused on her face, and she could see something like concern in their alien depths. "The scenario we have chosen may seem deliberately unfair. Some of my colleagues believe that by creating an impossible situation, we will expose what they see as human exaggeration and false claims." Hana studied his expression carefully. Years of diplomatic meetings had taught her to read the subtle signs that different species use to communicate their real thoughts. "But you do not agree with them." "I have studied your service record more carefully than most," Veltar admitted. "I have read not just the official reports but the detailed tactical analyses and the statements from witnesses who served under your command. The patterns I see in your decision-making process suggest something different from normal military thinking." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your approach to warfare appears to follow rules that the rest of us do not understand. You use resources in ways that seem wasteful until the final outcome becomes clear. You take risks that appear suicidal until they prove to be exactly the right choice. You find solutions to problems that others would consider unsolvable. You think differently from us, Commander Lee, and I am curious to see whether humans truly approach war in a fundamentally different way from the other 46 species in this alliance." Hana was quiet for a moment, thinking about his words. "High Arbiter, when this simulation is over, whether I succeed or fail, I want you to remember something important." She looked directly into his 6 eyes. "Humanity did not join this alliance because we were the strongest species in the galaxy. We did not join because we had the most advanced technology, or the largest fleets, or the most powerful weapons. We joined because when everyone else looked at a problem and said it was impossible, we looked at the same problem and said it just required a different approach." Veltar's skin shifted to a slightly different shade of gray, which indicated deep thought among his people. "That is exactly what I hope to understand better today." The chamber door began to open with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Beyond, it lay the simulation environment, currently showing nothing but empty space waiting for the scenario to begin. Hana paused at the threshold. "High Arbiter, humans have a saying that might help explain how we think about impossible situations. When someone tells us that something cannot be done, we often respond by saying, 'Hold my drink and watch this.'" The door sealed behind her with a quiet click, leaving Veltar staring thoughtfully at the entrance to what would soon become the most analyzed military simulation in Alliance history. Inside the chamber, the simulation began to materialize around Hana with startling realism. She found herself standing on the bridge of the TDS Incheon, a Terran heavy cruiser that felt completely real, despite being made of nothing but light and force fields. Through the viewports, she could see the planet New Busan spinning slowly. Below, its surface dotted with cities and industrial complexes. The artificial intelligence crew members turned to look at her with expressions of concern and determination that were impossible to distinguish from real human emotions. The holographic technology was so advanced that she had to remind herself these were not actual people. "Commander, we are detecting massive hyperspace signatures approaching the system," her virtual tactical officer, Lieutenant Park. "Preliminary scans indicate at least 50 enemy vessels." Hana moved to the captain's chair and activated the main tactical display. The approaching Morgothi fleet appeared as red symbols against the star field, their formation tight and professional. She studied their positioning and attack vectors with the careful attention of someone who had fought these enemies many times before. In the observation gallery, hundreds of alien delegates watched as the scenario began to unfold. Some had seen battle simulations before and knew what to expect. Others had never witnessed human military tactics firsthand. All of them were about to learn something new about the species that had joined their alliance only 50 years ago. "Status of the civilian population?" Hana asked. 15,000 civilians scattered across 3 major population centers, Lieutenant Park replied. Cities named Seoul, Busan, and Daegu. Enemy advanced scouts have already reached orbit and begun preliminary bombardment of military targets. The Morgothi ground forces will begin landing in approximately 20 minutes. Hana nodded and began entering commands into her tactical console. To the watching delegates, her actions seemed calm and methodical, showing no sign of panic or concern, despite the overwhelming odds she faced. But Admiral Kim, watching from the human section of the gallery, recognized the signs. The way she held her shoulders, the speed of her finger movements on the controls, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she studied the tactical display. She was not calm. She was focused with the intensity of a hunting predator that had just spotted its prey. "Communications, get me Admiral Wong on the frigate Daegu," Hana commanded. The face of another holographic officer appeared on the main screen. "Commander Lee, thank the ancestors you are here. We are completely outnumbered and outgunned. The civilians cannot possibly be evacuated before the enemy reaches bombardment range. Admiral Wong, I need you to do exactly as I tell you, regardless of how strange my orders might seem. Can I count on your support?" "Of course, Commander. What are your instructions?" Hana's smile was sharp and dangerous. "First, I want you to take your frigate down into the planet's atmosphere. Fly to the Taebaek mountain range and wait for my signal. Stay low and keep your engines cold." "Commander, atmospheric flight 4. A frigate is extremely dangerous and the mountains will provide no tactical advantage against enemy capital ships. Trust me, Admiral. The mountains are not for tactical advantage, they are for something much more important." In the gallery, Counselor Thren's mandibles clicked rapidly in confusion. What is she doing? Taking ships into atmosphere reduces their combat effectiveness and limits their mobility. High Arbiter Veltar leaned forward in his seat, his 6 eyes tracking every movement on the tactical display. She is thinking several moves ahead. Remember what she said about humans approaching problems differently. Watch and learn. On the bridge of the virtual Incheon, Hana continued issuing orders that seemed to make no tactical sense. She directed the second frigate to hide in the shadow of N. The holographic bridge of the TDS Incheon felt completely real around Commander Hana as the Morgothi fleet moved closer to New Busan. Through the viewports, she could see the planet's surface beginning to glow with the light of enemy bombardment. As advanced scouts began their preliminary attacks on military installations, the tactical display showed 12 massive enemy dreadnoughts approaching in perfect formation, surrounded by 40 smaller escort ships. Their weapons were already charging for the systematic destruction of everything on the planet's surface. In the observation gallery above the simulation chamber, hundreds of alien delegates watched in silent fascination as the impossible scenario unfolded. "Enemy fleet will reach optimal bombardment position in 12 minutes, reported Lieutenant Park, her virtual face showing the stress that any real officer would feel in this situation. "All civilian evacuation ships are still grounded. At current rate, we can save perhaps 2,000 people before the orbital bombardment. makes further rescue impossible. Hana studied the tactical display with the calm intensity of someone who had faced these odds before. But the delegates watching from above had never seen anything like what was about to happen. "Helm, take us down into the planet's atmosphere," she commanded. "Full-speed descent. Plot a course through the Taybake Mountains at maximum velocity." The bridge crew exchanged glances of concern. Lieutenant Park spoke carefully. "Commander, atmospheric flight for a heavy cruiser is extremely dangerous, especially at combat speed. The ship was not designed for that kind of stress, and the mountain ranges will provide no protection against orbital bombardment from capital ships." "You are correct, Lieutenant. The mountains will not protect us from orbital bombardment." Hana's fingers moved across her tactical console, entering a complex series of commands. "But they will hide us from the enemy's sensors while we prepare something special for our Morgothi friends." In the gallery, Counselor Thren clicked his mandibles in confusion. "She is taking her most powerful ship into the worst possible tactical position. This makes no sense by any military doctrine I have ever studied." Admiral Kim smiled grimly from the human section. He had served with Hana long enough to recognize the signs. "She is not following any doctrine you would recognize, Counselor. Watch carefully. You are about to see why humans have a reputation for winning impossible battles." The Incheon plunged into New Busan's atmosphere like a metal comet, its hull glowing from friction as it screamed through the sky at speeds that should have torn it apart. The ship wove between mountain peaks with precision that seemed impossible for something so large and heavy. Behind them, the Morgothi fleet detected the cruiser's atmospheric entry and began adjusting their bombardment pattern. "Now comes the interesting part," Hana murmured to herself. "Communications. Get me Colony Administrator Yoon on the surface." A panicked face appeared on the main screen. The administrator was clearly terrified, with explosions visible through the windows behind him. "Commander Lee, thank all the gods you are here. We are completely surrounded. The Morgothi have landed ground forces at all 3 population centers. There is no way to evacuate everyone in time. Administrator Yoon, I need you to do exactly what I tell you, no matter how strange it might seem. Begin immediate evacuation. Of all civilians to the Sobayak Industrial Complex. Everyone, no exceptions, you have 12 minutes. But Commander," Yoon's voice cracked with panic, "the industrial complex is directly in the path of the enemy advance. If we move everyone there, they will be slaughtered." Hana's voice carried absolute authority and confidence. "Administrator, I have fought the Morgothi for 8 years. Trust me, 12 minutes. Move everyone now." The communication ended, and Hana turned to her weapons officer. "Prepare all quantum torpedoes for launch. I want unusual targeting solutions. Send me the coordinates for New Busan's magnetic field generators." "The magnetic field generators?" Lieutenant Park looked confused. "Commander, those are terraforming satellites. They regulate the planet's electromagnetic field to protect against cosmic radiation. They have no military value." "Everything has military value if you think about it correctly." Hana transmitted the targeting coordinates to the weapons station. "Fire all tubes. Target the polar satellites first." The quantum torpedoes streaked upward from the Incheon's hidden position in the mountains, arcing through the atmosphere toward targets that made no sense to anyone watching. In the observation gallery, the alien delegates stared in confusion as the weapons exploded not against enemy ships, but against the terraforming equipment that protected New Busan's colonists. High Arbiter Veltar's 6 eyes tracked the torpedo trajectories on his display. "She is attacking the planet's magnetic field generators, but why would she want to disable the colonists' protection from radiation?" The answer became clear within seconds. The destruction of the magnetic field satellites sent massive electromagnetic pulses cascading through New Busan's magnetosphere. The planet's entire electromagnetic environment suddenly became chaotic and unpredictable. Captain Park, watching from the Terran delegation, whistled in appreciation. "Brilliant. She just turned the entire planet into a giant jamming system." The effect on the Morgothi fleet was immediate and dramatic. Their precisely coordinated formation began to drift apart as navigation systems struggled to compensate for the electromagnetic interference. More importantly, their targeting computers could no longer maintain accurate locks on surface targets through the electromagnetic storm Hana had created. "All fighters, execute Thunder Run protocol," Hana commanded. From their silent positions, scattered throughout the system, 12 human fighters burst into action. But instead of attacking the massive capital ships directly, they had a much more specific mission. Moving at maximum speed and using the electromagnetic chaos as cover, they targeted the escort vessel's communication arrays and sensor systems. In less than 3 minutes, the Morgathi fleet had been effectively blinded and rendered unable to coordinate their attacks. The great dreadnoughts could still fire their weapons, but they could no longer work together or identify priority targets through the electromagnetic storm. "Phase 2, Hana announced. "Helm, emergency ascent. Full military power, take us up now." The Incheon erupted from its mountain hiding place like an ancient dragon rising from its lair. The ship's emergence was perfectly timed to coincide with a new development on the planet's surface. Long lines of civilian evacuation ships loaded with all 15,000 colonists were lifting off from the Sobaek industrial complex. But they were not heading for the safety of open space. Instead, they were flying directly toward the confused and partially blinded Morgathi fleet. In the gallery, several delegates stood up in shock. Councillor Zaraan's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated extreme agitation. "She is flying civilian transports directly at the enemy fleet. This is madness." Admiral Kim's smile widened. "No, Councillor. This is Commander Lee Hana." The truth of her strategy became clear as the evacuation convoy approached the enemy formation, flying in tight formation with the Incheon providing escort, and using the electromagnetic interference as cover. The transport vessels appeared on the confused Morgathi sensors as something completely different from what they actually were. The enemy fleet, still partially blinded and unable to communicate effectively, detected what appeared to be a large formation of warships approaching at attack speed. Their combat computers, programmed with standard Morgathi doctrine, calculated the threat level and made the logical tactical decision. The entire enemy fleet turned to engage what they believed was a major attack force, rotating their formation to bring maximum firepower to bear on the approaching convoy. This maneuver exposed their flanks and rear sections to the 2 frigates that had been waiting in hiding. Admiral Wang's ship emerged from the Taebaek Mountains while the 2nd frigate broke cover from behind New Busan's moon. Both ships carried specialized armor-piercing weapons that were useless in a direct confrontation, but devastating when fired at unprotected engine sections. "All ships execute final phase," Hana commanded. What followed was 4 minutes and 37 seconds of the most precisely coordinated battle that any of the watching delegates had ever witnessed. The frigates struck the Morgathi dreadnoughts at their most vulnerable points, targeting the massive engine assemblies that had been exposed when the ships turned to engage the attacking fleet. Simultaneously, the fighters that had been sabotaging communication systems began systematic attacks on weapon emplacements and shield generators. The civilian evacuation convoy, protected by overlapping defensive screens from all 3 human warships and still disguised by electromagnetic interference, flew straight through the increasingly chaotic enemy formation and reached orbital escape velocity. By the time the Morgathi commanders realized they had been completely outmaneuvered, half their fleet was disabled, their formation was in ruins, and 15,000 human civilians were safely away from the planet. The remaining enemy ships, faced with a tactical situation that made no sense according to their programming, did the only thing their doctrine allowed. They retreated to regroup and analyze what had gone wrong. Commander Hana stood on the bridge of the virtual Incheon, watching the last enemy ships disappear into hyperspace. Around her, the artificial crew looked at her with expressions of awe and admiration that seemed completely real, despite being nothing but sophisticated programming. "Simulation complete," announced the computer system. "All objectives achieved. Civilian casualties, 0. Military casualties, 0. Enemy losses, 6 capital ships disabled, 14 escort vessels destroyed, remaining forces in retreat. The Holographic environment began to dissolve around her as the simulation chamber returned to its normal state. But in the observation gallery above, the silence was absolutely complete. Not a single one of the hundreds of watching delegates made any sound for a full minute. Commander Lee Hanna had just accomplished the impossible, and they had all watched it happen. The simulation chamber fell silent as the last traces of the holographic environment faded away. Commander Lee Hanna stood alone in the empty space, her uniform still carrying the faint shimmer of the advanced projection technology. Above her in the observation gallery, representatives from 47 different worlds sat in complete stillness, their various forms of expression creating a museum display of universal shock. High Arbiter Veltar was the first to break the silence. His 6 eyes were focused intently on Hanna as he spoke, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. In 43 years of military service across 17 different conflicts, I have never witnessed tactical thinking of such complexity and precision. Counselor Thren's mandibles clicked in a rapid pattern that his species used when their fundamental understanding of reality had been challenged. You turned the planet itself into a weapon. You used civilian evacuation ships as camouflage for a military operation. You convinced the enemy to defeat themselves by adopting tactically inferior positions. From the crystalline delegate Zaran came sounds like musical notes played on glass instruments. Her species communicated partly through color changes in their bodies and partly through these tonal patterns. The combination indicated deep confusion mixed with reluctant admiration. "How does one mind conceive strategies that require such precise timing?" she asked. "Such detailed understanding of enemy psychology? Such willingness to risk everything on calculations that depend on dozens of variables working perfectly together?" Hanna was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years spent fighting impossible battles and finding ways to win them anyway. "Because we are not like you," she said simply. "And I do not mean that as an insult to any species represented in this chamber. I mean it as an observation about how different evolutionary paths create different ways of thinking about problems." She looked around the gallery, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of different worlds. "Your species, all of your species evolved in environments where survival meant following certain rules that had been proven to work. Be stronger than your enemies. Be faster when you need to escape. Be smarter when planning your actions. Build better weapons and develop superior technology. Form alliances with those who can help you." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "These are logical approaches to survival, and they work very well in most situations. But humanity evolved in an environment where following the normal rules meant death. We are persistence hunters who ran our prey to exhaustion, not because we were faster, but because we refused to give up when any sensible creature would have stopped." Admiral Kim stood up from the Terran delegation section, his weathered face showing pride in the young commander he had helped train. "The commander is being modest about what she just demonstrated. What you witnessed was not just human nature, but human military doctrine, refined over thousands of years of warfare." He gestured toward the now empty simulation chamber. "We call it asymmetric warfare. When facing an enemy with superior numbers or technology, we do not try to match their strengths. Instead, we find ways to make their strengths irrelevant while turning our weaknesses into advantages." Counselor Rethan, whose species was known for careful analysis of every situation, leaned forward in his seat. "But the level of risk involved in this strategy, any single miscalculation would have resulted in complete disaster. How do you justify taking such chances with civilian lives?" Hanna's expression grew serious. "Counselor, let me ask you a question in return. If I had followed conventional military doctrine in that scenario, how many civilians would have been saved?" The chamber was quiet while various species military experts ran quick calculations on their personal displays. Finally, Counselor Thren spoke reluctantly. "Conventional evacuation procedures under those conditions would have saved approximately 2,000 civilians before orbital bombardment made further rescue impossible. So 13,000 people would have died," Hanna said quietly. 13,000 men, women, and children would have been killed because conventional tactics were inadequate for an unconventional situation. She stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Every choice I made in that simulation was calculated to maximize the chance of saving everyone. Yes, the risks were enormous, but the alternative was certain death for most of the people I was trying to protect. From the Keth delegation came their low harmonic rumble that indicated deep approval. Their species understood warfare in a way that many others did not. They recognized courage when they saw it, even when it came wrapped in tactics they could not fully comprehend. High Arbiter Veltar raised one of his secondary arms for attention. Commander Lee, I believe I am beginning to understand something about human military thinking that we have not fully appreciated before. When you see impossible odds, your first instinct is not to find a way to minimize losses. Your first instinct is to find a way to change the fundamental nature of the situation. Exactly, Hana confirmed. When other species calculate probabilities and find them unfavorable, humans calculate possibilities and look for ways to make them sufficient. She gestured toward the simulation chamber. What you just watched was not luck or reckless gambling. Every move was planned to create cascading effects that would force the enemy to make predictable responses. I used their own tactical doctrine against them. Counselor Zaraan's crystalline form shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue that indicated intense curiosity. But how could you predict their responses so accurately? The Morgothi have been successful conquerors for over 3 centuries. Their tactics have been tested against dozens of different species. That is exactly why I could predict them, Hana replied. Success breeds predictability. The Morgothi have won so many battles using the same approaches that they cannot imagine someone would try something completely different. When I destroyed the magnetic field generators, their computers calculated that it was either an accident or a desperate attempt to cause random damage. The possibility that I was creating strategic electromagnetic interference never occurred to their programming. Admiral Kim nodded from the gallery. The Morgothi think like generals who have never lost a war. They see a tactical situation, analyze the most efficient response based on proven doctrine, and execute it with overwhelming force. What they do not do is ask themselves what would happen if their enemy was not playing by the same rules they expect. From the back of the chamber, a new voice spoke up. It belonged to Counselor Velsan, whose species were known as master strategists and had advised many civilizations on military matters. Commander Lee, I must admit that your tactics worked perfectly in this simulation, but I have concerns about applying such methods in actual combat. He activated a holographic display that showed tactical analyses from previous human engagements. Your approach requires split-second timing and depends on numerous assumptions about enemy behavior. In real warfare, against actual opponents, who can learn and adapt, would these strategies still be effective? Hana's smile was sharp and confident. Counselor Velsan, every battle I described in my reports was real. The defense of New Sol, the extraction from the Void Nebula, the impossible rescue at Kepler 442. They all happened exactly as documented, against real Morgothi commanders who had decades of experience fighting different species. She paused, letting that information sink in throughout the chamber. The scenario you just watched was not theoretical. It was based on the actual battle at Kepler 442, where I saved 12,000 civilians using methods very similar to what you just observed. The gallery erupted in a low murmur of voices as delegates discussed this revelation among themselves. Several species began pulling up detailed records of the Kepler 442 engagement to compare it with the simulation they had just witnessed. High Arbiter Veltar stood up from his seat, his impressive height commanding attention from everyone present. Commander Lee Hana of the Terran Defense Force, the Galactic Defense Council, formally recognizes the accuracy of your service record. More than that, we acknowledge that humanity's contribution to this alliance extends far beyond what we previously understood. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence as he chose his words carefully. You mentioned earlier that humanity joined this alliance not because you were the strongest. 3 hours after the simulation ended, The council chamber was fuller than it had been in decades. Word of Commander Lee Hana's demonstration had spread throughout Nexus Prime, with the speed that only truly extraordinary news could achieve. Representatives who had missed the original session were now present, along with military advisors, tactical experts, and observers from every major species in the Alliance. Commander Hana stood once again at the center platform, but the atmosphere in the chamber was completely different from her first appearance. Where there had been skepticism and doubt before, there was now intense curiosity, and from many delegates, something approaching awe. High Arbiter Veltar called for order, and the vast chamber gradually fell silent. His 6 eyes focused on Hana as he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of formal ceremony. Commander Lee Hana of the Terran Defense Force, this council has witnessed a demonstration of tactical thinking unlike anything in our recorded military history. We have seen strategies that defy conventional doctrine, yet achieve results that conventional approaches could never accomplish. He paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. More importantly, we have confirmed that the reports of your previous engagements were not exaggerated or embellished. They were accurate records of impossible victories achieved through methods that we are only beginning to understand. From the crystalline counselor Zara-An came a musical tone that indicated formal agreement. The council acknowledges that our initial skepticism was based on our own limitations rather than any flaws in the evidence presented. We apologize for questioning achievements that we simply could not comprehend through our own experience. Counselor. Thren's mandibles clicked in what his species used as a gesture of respect. Commander, your demonstration has raised important questions about how this alliance approaches military planning and strategic thinking. We have been fighting the Morgathi Dominion for 12 years using tactics that, while sound, have produced mixed results. He activated a holographic display showing casualty reports and territorial losses from recent battles. Our conventional approaches have prevented total defeat, but they have not achieved the kind of decisive victories that your forces have accomplished. We are beginning to wonder if we have been fighting this war incorrectly. Admiral Kim stood up from the Terran delegation section. Counselors, if I may address that concern. What you witnessed today was not just one exceptional commander demonstrating unusual tactics. Commander Lee represents a systematic approach to asymmetric warfare that the Terran Defense Force has been developing for decades. He gestured toward several other human officers who had entered the chamber. Captain Park here commanded the successful defense of the Centauri colonies using similar methods. Lieutenant Colonel Cho led the counteroffensive that broke the Morgathi siege of New Tokyo. Major Yoon developed the tactical doctrine that allowed our forces to operate effectively in the Void Nebula region. The implications of his words rippled through the chamber like waves. Several delegates began talking among themselves in urgent whispers. Counselor Rethan leaned forward in his seat. Admiral Kim, are you suggesting that the entire human military has been trained to think and fight in ways similar to what we just observed? Not identical methods, Kim clarified. Every situation requires different solutions. But yes, Counselor, the underlying approach to problem solving, the willingness to take calculated risks, the refusal to accept that any situation is hopeless, these are fundamental elements of human military doctrine. High Arbiter Veltar was quiet for several moments, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice carried new understanding. This explains something that has puzzled our military analysts for years. Human forces consistently achieve results that seem impossible based on standard tactical calculations. We assumed this was due to better equipment or superior training. We did not realize it was due to fundamentally different thinking. Hana stepped forward. High Arbiter, members of the Council, I want to be very clear about something important. Human tactics are not superior to your approaches in all situations. Our methods work because the enemies we face do not expect them, but they come with significant risks that more conventional strategies do not have. She activated her own display, showing detailed analyses of several human engagements. The defense of New Sol succeeded, but it came within minutes of complete failure. The Void Nebula extraction worked, but if any one of 12 different calculations had been wrong, We would have lost everything. Our methods are effective, but they are not safe. Counselor Velsan, the master strategist, studied the data carefully. You are saying that human tactics succeed precisely because they accept levels of risk that other species consider unacceptable. Exactly. When we see a situation where conventional wisdom says the probability of success is 5%, we do not retreat or look for alternatives. We ask ourselves what we could do to increase that probability to 51%. And then we act on that plan. From the Keth delegation came their harmonic rumble of approval. Their warrior culture understood the concept of accepting dangerous odds in pursuit of victory. High Arbiter Veltar stood up to his full impressive height. Commander Lee, the Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's role in our common defense against the Morgathi Dominion. The chamber fell completely silent. This was the moment that would determine how the galaxy viewed humanity's place in the Alliance. Given what we have learned about human military capabilities and tactical thinking, we formally request that the Terran Defense Force take primary responsibility for strategic planning in our upcoming operations against the Dominion. The silence that followed was absolute. Several delegates looked shocked by the magnitude of what Veltar had just proposed. Others nodded in agreement, having reached the same conclusion during the day's discussions. Furthermore, Veltar continued, we request that human advisors be assigned to work with the military forces of all member species, not to replace existing command structures, but to introduce new approaches to tactical problem-solving. Hana was quiet for a moment, understanding the responsibility that was being offered to her species. High Arbiter, the Terran Defense Force would be honored to accept this role, but I want to make sure you understand what you are asking for. She looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces. You are asking humans to teach your forces to think like we do, to take risks that seem unreasonable, to attempt solutions that appear impossible, to refuse to accept defeat even when defeat seems certain. Her voice grew stronger. You are asking us to help you become the kind of enemies that the Morgathi have never faced before, enemies who do not follow their rules or respond to their tactics in predictable ways. Veltar's skin shifted to a darker gray, indicating determination among his people. Commander Lee, the Morgathi Dominion has conquered 43 different civilizations over the past 5 centuries. They have defeated enemies with superior technology, greater numbers, and more advanced strategies. What they have never faced is an enemy that approaches warfare as humans do. He spread his primary arms wide, in a gesture that encompassed the entire chamber. You offered to prove that your achievements were real. You have done more than that. You have shown us that there is another way to think about impossible situations. Counselor Thren clicked his mandibles in formal agreement. The Dominion expects us to fight like civilized beings following established military doctrine. They have prepared for enemies who make careful calculations and accept reasonable limitations. Zaraan's crystalline form pulsed with colors indicating excitement and anticipation. They have not prepared for enemies who look at impossible odds and say, "Watch this." As the formal session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Admiral Kim approached Hana with a mixture of pride and concern on his weathered face. Hana, do you realize what just happened here? They have essentially asked humanity to revolutionize how this entire alliance fights wars. She nodded slowly. I know, Admiral, and when the Morgathi arrive in force, they are going to discover that everything they think they know about their enemies has changed. Her smile was sharp and dangerous. They wanted to fight a conventional war against a conventional alliance, using conventional tactics. Instead, they are going to face something they have never encountered before. She looked toward the chamber doors where the council members were still discussing the implications of their decision. They are going to face 47 different species who have learned to think like humans when the situation seems impossible. As they walked from the chamber, the silence behind them was filled with anticipation rather than doubt. The council had wanted to know if she had seen action. Now the entire galaxy was about to see what happened when humanity taught their allies. That impossible was just another word for interesting. The Morgathi Dominion was coming. They were going to be very surprised.